All right, so just as people are shuffling in, I'm going to do a little introduction. So, my name is Kian, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, there are a couple of housekeeping rules to go over. So just for everyone to know, if you are joining online, your cameras will remain off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you can type any questions that you have into the chat or the Q&A section, and our speaker will get those answered throughout the presentation as they come in. Also, following the presentation, we will have a very brief survey that will only take about a minute to complete. And this survey is very important because it helps support programming like this one, so we really appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. And finally, introducing our speaker tonight is Bob Henrickson. Bob attended the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and graduated with a BS in wildlife biology in the School of Natural Resources. Currently, Bob is the horticulture program coordinator with the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. His responsibilities include growing native and other well-adapted plants for plant sales to our members and the public. Bob has hosted a live call-in gardening talk show called How's It Growin' on a community radio station in Lincoln since 2000, so 25 years. That's pretty exciting. Thanks for being here tonight, everybody, and thank you, Bob, for being here yet again to share your knowledge. So I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Kian. All right, it's great to be here. And as you guys know, this is Planting for Pollinators Part Deuce or Part Two. And maybe you caught the first part. If you haven't, it's available on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and type in Conservation Nebraska Planting for Pollinators, yeah, you can see Part One, which talks more about pollinators in general before we get to the plants. But this evening, I just wanted to give you a quick recap why native plants are important. Research has shown that they support 3 times as many species as introduced plants. And why is that? Well, the critters that take advantage of our native plants, they have chemicals in them. Certain plants have chemicals that kind of deter insects, otherwise they'd all get eaten up. And the critters that lay their eggs on these plants don't recognize exotic species. So caterpillars, for example, and we talked about that, why they're so important, caterpillar production in our landscape for songbird production in our landscape. We all want more songbirds. And all these things are declining mainly from habitat loss. So just a quick recap on that. This prairie, this beautiful prairie picture is, man, something we should all strive for, right? In a hot, sunny location. And this was a hot day when I took this picture. The Chicago area, Morton Arboretum, it's called a Schulenburg Prairie, and it was one of the first reconstructed prairies in the nation at the time, back in the 50s. And the guy was from Nebraska. And he did it mostly from seed, but also grew plugs in his little greenhouse and planted the plugs out there, things that were going to be a little slower growing. He planted, so he did a mixture. And all these years later, this picture is probably taken, around 2010. And Chicago was 9 inches below normal. They had a big time drought going on. And the prairie, as you can see, is just kind of shrugging its shoulders. And for me, that's why I also like native plants. They're low input, low impact. Once you get them established, they don't need help from us. They can tolerate some extreme drought conditions and still keep on shining without us wasting water. So it's all about low input plants for me as well. And a diversity of plants, we provide a multiple sources of pollen and nectar. The insects that use them will have an improved immune system and be better equipped to survive parasitism, which the honeybee especially is having problems with, colony collapse disorder, amongst other things. And of course, we all know the honeybee is an introduced species, but still, it's kind of that canary in the coal mine that we can monitor that bee farmer, if you will. And if they're in trouble, you better believe our native bees are in trouble as well. So where we left off last time, I went through what at least I consider, and this is based on the Xerces Society's plant lists and others, what they say are top-notch pollinator plants. So if I was to choose 20 different plants I think we have here, or types of plants, these would be my first choice if I was to help our pollinating insects. And what we did last time in part one is we went through a lot of the different plants and we made it all the way to goldenrod. And so you can see where goldenrod falls on the list and kind of left off there. So we'll continue with this all important Nebraska state flower. But get this, in Nebraska, we have, I think it's around 8 species native to our state, each one of them critically important to pollinating insects. They invite a wide variety of species, from native bees to, of course, the honeybee there in the upper left picture. But the flies out there, soldier beetles, the blister beetles, so many different things. In fact, research has shown 115 different species of butterflies and moths utilize the goldenrod. And the goldenrod, you can tell people no, it does not cause hay fever, so we should plant more of it. And I don't want it to take the fate of the milkweed. And milkweed used to be much more common 40 years ago, but now with our mow happy and spray happy society, we don't let the milkweed really stand a chance in the so-called wild areas anymore. So it's up to us gardeners, I guess, to put these plants in our landscape. Just know this is a picture of Canada goldenrod, which is often called the weedy goldenrod because it doesn't play nice. It can be certainly be a garden thug. But in my mind, if it's seeding around, you can cut off the seed heads to keep it from seeding around. But if it does, the plants are pretty darn easy to remove, in my opinion. And it'll take advantage of open ground. But if you have your garden stuffed with plants, this is a great backdrop for an area that really nothing else will grow in because they're so easy and tough. That is the Canada goldenrod. But there's a lot of other different species. Some more flat topped like this, like the stiff goldenrod, also a pollinator magnet. You can see all the bees on that one, and often is utilized, certainly not in really small landscapes. And this one can get, out a little out of bounds in small landscapes where it gets too tall and leggy for people. High and dry is what this thing likes. The tougher the conditions, the shorter the plant's going to be, and it's not going to get big, overgrown, and floppy on you. But I just love it for its flat-topped appearance. And if you know the pitcher sage, the blue in this picture, pitcher sage is also called blue sage. It's one of our native salvias, and it blooms late summer, early fall as well. This would probably be a late August shot, early September. And there it is combined with a stiff goldenrod. Really beautiful, and both of them, again, pollinator magnets. And believe it or not, goldenrods, the seed heads of goldenrods will persist for a long time, but just like the purple coneflowers, the yellow goldfinches will certainly take advantage of the seed heads and eat the seeds of goldenrods as well. So it's good for songbirds in the fall and leading into the winter. One of my favorite goldenrods is the showy goldenrod. This one is vastly overlooked in landscapes and aptly named with that title of showy goldenrod. But this one is just not very common. And you can see it grows more into what we call a candle rather than a spray or a true golden rod, if you will. And you can see the monarchs going crazy for that plant as they migrate through in the fall. So the flower cluster is gorgeous, but there on the right, that's what the seed heads look like later on in October and into November. Oh, they usually blow away by, let's say Thanksgiving into Christmas time, somewhere around there. But I like actually cutting those and I'll put them in outdoor bouquets in the wintertime and they look rather attractive. But showy goldenrod sure is a looker. And then another goldenrod I wanted to show you is called Wichita Mountains. And this is a good example of what would a named goldenrod. The species, I think it's called gray-leafed goldenrod, but it was named Wichita Mountains. You could argue more for marketing purposes, but it was actually more to show where the goldenrod came from. The Wichita Mountains are in western Oklahoma, And that's where the seed of this plant was collected. And Harlan Hammernick at Bluebird Nursery introduced this plant. He was the one that discovered it at some guy's nursery there in Oklahoma that said, yeah, I dug it out of the hills up there in the Wichita Mountains. And so there we go. So it's a good example of what people would deem a nativar or a so-called cultivar of goldenrod. A lot of those times, those named wildflowers were found in nature, discovered in nature, and the seed collected in nature. They were just given a fancy name. So until you learn about that plant and its history, I encourage you to do that because I think it's holding some people back on getting some plants that may or may not, uh, you know, in their mind may or may not to benefit pollinators. But I tell you what, Wichita Mountains goldenrod is a magnet for the pollinators. That picture on the right is it with one of my favorite asters called smooth aster. Great combination with those two in the fall. And all sorts of different species of butterflies take advantage of goldenrods. And it too has some cool seed heads that persist on the plant well into the fall and into the winter. And the picture doesn't show it, but when we get a snow, an early snow in say November, gosh, did I just say that? Early snow used to be October, right? But anyway, it's just really a cool seed head and they persist for a long time. And of course, you can cut them and put them in one of your outdoor containers that now has frozen flowers and maybe you've removed those flowers and you have an empty container. You can do like a seed head decoration, if you will. But the pictures, it's hard to see in that picture on the left, but there are soldier beetles and blister beetles and insects all over that thing. So the Wichita Mountains goldenrod, very easy to grow because of where it comes from in western Oklahoma. This thing is extremely drought tolerant. You get it established. In fact, you would do this plant more harm with kindness. It never needs a drink of water from you, even in extreme drought. And I mentioned a goldenrod can grow like a rod like this. The flowers more grows like a gay feather type habit, or it can be more like a spray like this one. And fireworks goldenrod, you could argue, is another nativar, but this one was discovered in the wild in a low area. So this species grows in wet areas and naturally. Rugosa, I believe it is, Solidago rugosa and it was found in some wet area in North Carolina. And some guy introduced it and gave it the fancy name fireworks, again, for marketing appeal. But what an easy goldenrod and aptly named with that beautiful arching fountain-like habit. Much different effect than the fireworks, or I'm sorry, the Wichita Mountains, as you can see. This is at the Game and Parks headquarters, so we can thank our friend Carol Morganson for planting that one. Okay, so that's with goldenrod. Now, another fantastic group of plants that every garden should have are the hyssops. And there's a number of different species of hyssop out there becoming very popular in the garden because people want to help the bees. And man, this one is one of the best for pollinating insects. Anybody that's listening in that has a hyssop, please feel free to chat as I'm talking about plants. Oh, you got to have this one, pollinator magnet, whatever you feel. All I know is anise hyssop is an herb as well, and it makes a fantastic tea. We make a cold brew tea out of this plant in the summertime because herbalists call this a cooling herb. So it'll help cool you down drinking a cold brewed tea out of the refrigerator. First thing I grab on a hot summer day when I get home from work and looking for something refreshing. Of course, with some crushed ice. Oh, it's just a bomb. You can make a syrup out of it, all sorts of good recipes. In fact, if you look up health benefits of anise hyssop, uh, uh, be aware you're gonna learn a lot because this plant is nature's powerhouse. And I've read where one of these spikes can have up to 70,000 flowers. Because if you look closely, each one of these little round, there's one individual flower. So it's a spike made up of literally thousands of different flowers because one will open and then be spent and then new ones will develop beyond it. So it blooms for a long period of time because of that and that pretty blue color. The only thing you have to be aware with anise hyssop is it does seed around, and some people have complained about it seeding around too much. I say find an area of the garden where you don't mind it, kind of owning that spot, and just let it continue to reseed because the individual plants might only live, oh, well, let's say 2 to 3 years. So you want it to reseed because of that. But it's a great plant to have in the garden for your herbal medicine chest and for the bees' herbal medicine chest because it's also building their immune system. This is more of the native version of blue giant hyssop. So anise hyssop comes from across the pond of, I think it's actually native to Korea. But the blue giant hyssop, this one is native to Nebraska, believe it or not. And it is aptly named blue giant hyssop. This thing can get up to 5 feet tall, but wow, it attracts a myriad of insects when it's in bloom. And not the showiest plant. The foliage is not the showiest plant, but when it's in flower, it really is a showstopper. And again, you're looking at a 5 foot tall plant there, so it's a good backdrop plant to have in the garden. And blooms for a long period of time. You can deadhead it to get a flush of bloom to kind of tidy the plant up too. But the blue giant hyssop has really become a great popular plant for folks. Whoops, another one of anise hyssop. There you see in the fall, later on in the fall and into winter, the seed heads are very attractive, especially with a little hoarfrost on them and or cast against the snow as a backdrop. They really stand up like that all winter long and look attractive. But just know those seed heads will have lots of seed in them, and they are going to drop the seed in open ground and maybe become a nuisance to you or maybe not. But you can see the individual flowers. These are the spent flowers here, those empty little capsule things here, and then you can see flowers here and there. So the bees in there working it over. And then it has a cousin called yellow hyssop or yellow giant hyssop because this is another giant. This guy gets, I would say, 5 to 6 feet tall, but it's a very erect plant in the garden, very upright, and it tolerates a boatload of shade. I have it at home and it seeds around here and there in my shady nooks, and I welcome it there. I just say, you do what you do, because I tell you what, this plant, oh yeah, thanks for the tip there, Eileen. She says goldfinch love the seeds, and I'm glad you pointed that out because any of these hyssops I'm talking about are great for goldfinches. Because again, we've heard of the coneflowers being good, but it's not the only plant. So you got goldenrod as well as the hyssops. But really, this yellow giant hyssop doesn't get planted enough. I like the green color. It really has a rich green color. The flowers are small. Yes, they're teeny, but I'm telling you what, the bumblebees find them and they just go crazy for it. You can see one individual spike, in this picture on the right has spent flowers, flowers in bloom, and then the flower buds. So it has a relatively long bloom time. I would say around a month. And then after it blooms, you have these really cool seed heads, and you can harvest those and dry them at this stage, or you can let them turn this nice, chocolatey brown color, and I'll harvest those and use those for dried arrangement swips as well. And this plant actually, you can see native growing naturally down at Wilderness Park, which is kind of cool. So great pollinator plant, another one great for finches in the wintertime, or great for you to use for decoration for indoor, outdoor containers. I think it's really cool anyway. Okay, now let's move on to Helenium. Helen's flower used to be, well, still is called by many sneezeweed, and not a very, good name for a plant. So another name for it is Helen's flower. So let's just call it that. And the reason they called it sneezeweed back in the day is it does not cause hay fever. However, they used to dry the flowers and create a snuff out of them to induce sneezing. But this plant, this close-up of the flowers really shows off the difference between it and say a coreopsis or a sunflower or anything like that. And you'll think of any yellow flower is the petals have these teeth on them, which really sets the heleniums apart from other species. And another thing to note is this is a perfect example of a composite flower. And what a composite flower is, we talked about this last time, is there's many flowers, sometimes hundreds or more than 100 on one flower itself. So this individual is actually not an individual at all. It's made up of dozens and dozens. Here is an actual flower right here, this tiny little thing right there. So you can see down here at the bottom of the skirt, this is where all the action started. So it's moving its way up, and all these are flowered buds ready to bloom yet. So you can see this one is spent, right? Every flower has been bloomed. You see the open pockets in it. Whereas this one is about halfway done. These haven't even gotten started yet. So what composite flowers do for you is the showy ray petals on here is just for show to attract the pollinator, but it will provide us humans that show for a long time. That's why composite flowers tend to bloom longer than others, because they will go through this whole bloom cycle before it starts to go downhill or deteriorate or just say, I'm done, I'm spent. I'm going to go to seed now. And each one of these little tubes will have a seed inside of it. Isn't that cool? What an awesome plant, the Helen's flower. I think one of the reasons, though, it doesn't get planted enough is because it's a big boy. I mean, it gets up there 5 feet tall. But if you're somebody looking to plant a rain garden, or you have an area of the garden that stays wet too often and you're wondering what I can plant there in that wet soil, man, this thing thrives in wet soil. However, it takes good average garden soil. If we're in times of extreme drought, I might water it, but it's more equipped in nature to grow in wet areas. That being said, it's very easy to grow. And talk about a pollinator magnet. Sometimes when you take pictures of flowers, the pollinators all fly away, right? But believe you me, they were all over these plants. And there's kind of a good example of maybe what not to do. This was at a garden in K-State, I remember. We were visiting down there and they were showcasing wildflowers. And this was a good example of, well, I'm not planting this thing. It's too big and beefy and I don't have space for that. Well, they planted it right next to the sidewalk. Not a good place to put a big Helen's flower. This is more of a backdrop plant or a plant planted in amongst a bunch of prairie grasses, right? But again, it just doesn't get planted enough. It's such an awesome plant. And pollinators, again, I like pictures of insects that show you what we would call a top-notch pollinator plant. One that's important is one that invites a diversity of insects. And you can see we've got a hoverfly on there. We've got a bumblebee, what looks like a mason bee or a leaf cutter. I can't quite tell. I don't know my bees well enough, but all four native bees. Okay, now for Joe Pye. And this plant's got a funny name. Joe Pye was a herbalist, actually, turn of the century herbalist that believed this plant cured typhoid fever. In fact, this plant was used medicinally by Native Americans, and herbalists to this day do use Joe Pye, the Eupatorium species. There's a number of them that have medicinal um, attributes to them, but we won't talk about that today. But Joe Pye plant used to be called Joe Pye weed, but I'm telling you, it's definitely not a weed. I've not seen this plant seed around the garden. If it has on you, let me know in the chat because I certainly haven't seen that happen. It does get to be a big, robust plant. And I like putting Helen's flower, the Helenium, with this because they're both big. This guy will get 5 to 6 feet tall and great backdrop, and it likes it wet as well. Or again, what I mean by it likes it wet is if you have a low area or an area that stays too wet in the garden, or after a heavy rain like we had last night, the water maybe kind of sits in that low area a little bit, and some of your plants are struggling there. This would be one that would not struggle there. It would actually like it. That being said, both Helen's flower and Joe Pye plant can take certainly what I call average garden conditions. You don't have to baby this plant. It's easy to grow. And those flowers that form that you're seeing show up on the plant in the fall. So we're talking early September, something like that. And though each of those heads can be a foot across. and the pollinators love this plant. There's a variety called Gateway that you often get, and Gateway is another one of those nativars. What was this thing selected for? It was selected because it grew a little bit shorter than the typical species, because the typical species of this plant might get 8 feet tall, and nobody was planting it. So along came Gateway that somebody said, hey, this one stays shorter, like 5 feet, which is not really short, but you can see it in comparison to black-eyed Susans, how big they get. This is a plant, though, you can cut back and pinch back in the late spring, early summer, and keep the plant shorter and get it to bloom more like 3 feet high. So, but that's just another story for another day. Pruning perennials for peak performance, I call it. But what a showstopper, the Joe Pye plant. And it's another one you could call composites because those flower clusters, each one of these little stars you see is an individual flower. So you can see one little cluster on a big cluster that's 12 inches across can have dozens and dozens of flowers. That's why you really see a lot of insects and different species of insects clamor over this plant. Top-notch pollinator, the Joe Pye plant. Okay, let's move on to lead plant. So lead plant is one of those fantastic natives that, should be any sunny, dry garden. The only issue with lead plant is one, it doesn't look very attractive in pots, so it often doesn't get purchased from folks. Two, it takes its sweet time to really come into its own. You have to be patient with this plant. Give it its space, give it its sun, water it in the first couple of weeks, maybe every other day, and then it's on its own. But it's what we call a suffrutescent perennial, and meaning it over time it gets very woody stems like a little shrub. But you can also prune it down to ankle high or shin high. Usually I prune mine down to about knee high every spring to tidy the plant up, and then it'll shoot off new growth off of that. And then you're left with this weird Medusa looking plant. The flowers kind of look like snakes coming out of it, right? And the flowers are fleeting, but really what I really like about lead plant is when this look right now in the garden. It wakes up a little bit later than some plants, but it really loves the heat. So when it comes on here in mid-May, late May, it really looks gorgeous in the garden. And here's where it got its name from. Somebody thought it looked like lead or metal-like, that tone or color. And I actually use this plant for tea. This is a great time of year to harvest it and dry that and use it for tea. And there's recipes out there for it online. Makes a fantastic tea. But the flowers are really gorgeous, that beautiful indigo blue, each flower dusted in gold with that golden anthers coming out. You can see it's a spike, but lots and lots of individual little flowers. So the bees will go crazy for it, even though it might, I'm telling you, maybe 10 days it blooms or a little longer, but the flower buds are cool to look at too. So although the flowers are fleeting, they sure are gorgeous when they're doing their thing. And if you know butterfly milkweed, it's a great combination with this plant because they bloom around the same time. I love this one, butterfly milkweed and purple poppy mallow in the same location. Delicious. Speaking of milkweeds, let's move on to milkweeds because they're vital. And we all know the milkweeds for the monarch, right? And there's actually somebody that kind of studied what is the best milkweed for the larvae, which one do they like to feed on the most? And we'll show you which one here coming up. They're all good, of course, but there's some that really have kind of, I guess, are better than others. And one of the issues that we have, why are the monarchs in trouble, is habitat loss. Not only are the milkweeds, in peril throughout the country, but also they're where they're overwintering. The land where they're overwintering is also, facing pressures from urbanization and logging and harvesting and whatnot. So it's a critter in trouble. And but milkweeds also attract a host of lots of other critters, and people are like, oh, is that going to kill my milkweed? those yellow aphids that you may see on your milkweed plant, and they don't just hit, this is common milkweed, they'll hit butterfly milkweed, they'll hit rose milkweed, they'll hit them all. And they don't kill the plant, but they can kind of make it look a little unsightly as they're sucking that juice out of there. But just rest assured, you don't have to spray them. Sometimes I'll tip cut them off. I'll just cut the tip off and kind of remove their population that way and let the plant come out of it so they don't have eggs laid there for next year. So you just kind of reduce that population, if you will. But just wanted to show you the oleander aphids. And get this, so in the wondrous pageantry of nature, we have critters like the syrphid fly that we all know the housefly, right? That maggots, they're gross, right? But get this, the syrphid fly, which kind of looks like a housefly, it lays its larvae in and around to be a predator for aphids, just like the ladybugs, right? Everybody knows about the ladybugs, but there's a host of other insects whose larvae eat aphids. Things like the fireflies, for example, other beetles out there are important critters, just as important as the monarch. And the milkweeds will invite things like the milkweed tussock moth that only feed on milkweeds, the red milkweed beetle. You've probably seen that beetle if you have seen a patch of milkweeds, you've seen that beetle on there. They really are they only feed on milkweeds as well. And then milkweed bugs is another one that can hit milkweeds pretty hard. But again, none of these critters take the milkweed out. They'll just take a bite here and there. All right, probably the most sought after wildflower for people, in my opinion, is butterfly milkweed. Everybody wants it. Just know this is a dryland species. It wants it high and dry. It wants it hot and sunny. Too much shade, it'll not perform. And it's got an intense root system. So trying to move it in the garden is a no-no as well. So get it established. Then you can collect seed and kind of sow the seed around and let it come up in places maybe that were unexpected. Love the flower buds even when it's not in bloom. And there's a monarch caterpillar feeding on it while it is in bloom. That's a pretty cool shot. But the reason it's so sought after is that burnt orange color, and some are more burnt orange than others. But there's my little dog in the picture there showing the scale of that. It's probably that's one of the biggest ones I'd ever seen. My friend Jill's yard, her old yard that she used to have, that's around 2.5 by 2.5 feet. Impressive butterfly milkweed. And she just kind of shrugged her shoulders like, what are you doing special for it? I don't know. I just kind of let it do its thing. And that's the key, is let it do its thing. It doesn't need any help from us. Certainly no extra water because it's extremely drought tolerant. And again, the insects go crazy for it, attracts a wide diversity. And it lends itself to a lot of great combinations in the garden. As I mentioned to you, I like this one with lead plant and purple poppy mallow. But here's another great combination with some overlooked perennials. The butterfly milkweed with wild quinine is that white one in the mix. What a cool wildflower. And then the Virginia mountain mint is also in that picture. That is this bushy looking thing that you see here and over here that will be in bloom a little bit later. So great combination plant for a hot, dry, sunny area. Then we got the so-called weedy milkweed. This is the road ditch milkweed, or the milkweed that grows in our wild areas. And certainly people are putting it in their garden and learning that this is a very rhizomatous species. It'll run underground, and it's definitely not going to come up in the same place every year. But if you kind of have a yard where you're like, hey, come up here, come up there, I really don't care. I'm going to enjoy you because that flower is so awesome. It smells sweet, very fragrant, and more of a round umbel than a flat-topped umbel that you saw with the butterfly milkweed. And some of the flowers are more purple than others on the common milkweed. You can see like just the one down below here having almost some yellow tinge to it. But a very important plant for wildlife, are pollinating insects as well as all the other critters I showed you. The common milkweed is the one that attracts them all. And you may not be aware of this, but all milkweeds have this very unique flower. That's what sets them apart. So here you can see a close-up of a milkweed flower, and it's just a miracle that the darn things can get pollinized in the first place. When the insects land, and this kind of gives you an excuse to, like, when your milkweed's in bloom and the insects are on it, keep your eye on them and watch them because they'll work over that sticking their nose down there to get the nectar. But while they're doing that, their feet will get stuck in these stigmatic slits that you see along here. So their foot goes down in there, and then they have to pull out their foot. And then you can see in the bottom of this bee's foot is that the stigma. And then when they land on another one, and they're walking around the thing, they have to literally shove it back in there. So it's all by accident. I don't think the insects know any better. Like, well, let's see, I think I'll pull that out and then shove it back in. So it's just amazing that it even happens. So you can see why pollination is so important to these plants. And sometimes you'll see butterfly milkweed, it bloomed really well, but it never produced seed heads. Why is that? Oftentimes it's because this never happened. Because our pollinators, if they're lacking, to get this done, well, the plant's doomed because this is the only way it's going to get pollinated, not from the wind. And you see the feet over here, they're also covered. So all of his guy's feet are covered with this stigmatic goo, if you will. Isn't that cool? Pretty crazy. Oh, and there's the another close-up of the bugs. This one, though, research shown the rose milkweed, also called swamp milkweed, is the best for like people looking to rear uh, the monarch. This is what their larvae like feeding on the most. This milkweed in nature is not a dryland species like the butterfly milkweed. This is what we call a wetland or lowland species, hence the name swamp milkweed. However, it does not need a swamp or really wet area to do well in the garden. It does just fine in average garden conditions, but just know it can be relatively short-lived. And what I mean by that, after about 3 years, they might fizzle out. So I know people that just let them seed around, and if they get a young plant coming up somewhere where they don't want it, they will just dig it up and move it where they do want it. Easy to move the young seedlings, and you want it to seed around because it's such a gorgeous plant and a pollinator magnet. So easy to grow, just a winner. And probably blooms in the heat of the summer is what I like about it too. It's more of a July bloomer, July into August, and really lends itself with grasses around it. The grasses kind of frame the flowers, if you will. And when we as humans like a scene in nature, what we tend to like is fine texture pitted against more coarse texture. So the two combined together really, as an architect might say, let you rest your eyes on that area, be really attracted to something like that. That's why we like to say plant ornamental grasses with your flowers because they will help really make it look great. And two, grasses are very drought tolerant. They're easy to grow. They provide shelter for the wildflowers on windy days too, and shelter for the pollinating insects that are trying to deal with the wind too, because the grass will kind of act as a windbreak, if you will, around the flowers. So lots of reasons to include grasses. There again, you can see the unusual makeup of a milkweed flower. They all have that kind of that upturned and then bottom turned petals on them. Rose milkweed, aptly named. There's a variety out there called Cinderella. This is Cinderella, and Cinderella again is a named nativar that was found in nature that had darker flowers than the typical species. So they said, okay, let's collect the seed from that, isolate it, and do a seed strain. We'll call it Cinderella. And then there's a white one out there I'll show you in a bit too called Ice Ballet. So there are the seed pods and the seed being released out of the milkweed. There again, you can collect it yourself and just sow it where you want it. And just know that milkweeds need light to germinate. So you can literally just sow it on top of the ground in the fall in, say, an open area or an area you worked up the soil a little bit. Sow that seed and you will get it to germinate the following year. You don't even have to worry about burying the seed. The freeze thaw cycle in the wintertime will kind of bury it for you and away you go. It'll germinate for you in the spring. Yeah, there you see Cinderella against Ice Ballet. Ice Ballet was a white one that was discovered in nature. And I've always wondered, well, does that one attract pollinating insects as well, even though it's a named plant? Heck yes, it does, just as well as the straight species. And you can see a cluster of milkweed. There's lots of flower buds, so individual flowers, again, what we would call a composite, if you will. There's a close-up of Ice Ballet. Ants all over it. What they're after is the nectar as well. What a gorgeous plant, I think. And the two together combined really, really well in the garden. Love me some swamp milkweed and pollinator magnet, you guys. I'm telling you, it is top notch when it comes to pollinators. Now I want to tell you about a little more unusual species. Unusual in that it's not very common at the garden centers. I'm sure you could find it at folks like Midwest Natives or Prairie Legacy. Those are two good names to remember. At the Statewide Arboretum where I work, we also sell native plants. We don't offer smooth milkweed, or at least I haven't for a while. These milkweeds hate containers, so if they look rough in a container, that's why. Probably easiest to do it from seed. I would recommend ordering some seed and preparing your bed and sowing it in the fall. Like I had talked, the smooth milkweed is worth seeking out and putting on your wish list. The flowers are like thick and waxy. They have a lot of texture to them, if you will, and a gorgeous color. And it's named smooth milkweed because the leaves are smooth. So if you look at the back side, that's my dirty hands. I was probably digging in the dirt that day. But the back side of the leaf, it doesn't have any hairs on it, whereas the back side of common milkweed has small little hairs on it. And that's how to tell the difference. But this one in nature is, I would call it endangered in Nebraska, certainly threatened species in Nebraska, because where this plant grows native, we only have 1/10 of 1% of the original prairie. And this plant tends to only inhabit unplowed prairies. It's not getting planted enough. So let's try to change that and plant the smooth milkweed. Another common name for this plant is Sullivan's milkweed. You can see the scientific name down here, Asclepias sullivantii, or Sullivan's milkweed. Fantastic plant. All right. And then the final milkweed I want to talk about, and because there's other ones to talk about, believe it or not, you guys, there's purple milkweed. Oh, I'd love to just, you gotta stop somewhere, right? But I wanted to bring world milkweed to the table because this one is short-lived as well, maybe about a couple, 3 years. It's more of a colonizing milkweed. And what I mean by that is it's going to spread around for you mainly by seed. And but you want it to do that, it'll kind of weave its way in between grasses. Say you plant this short prairie type garden and you're planting little blue stem and Cyto's grama and blue grama, let's call those the prairie three, where you're planting your grasses 2 feet apart, but then you're putting something like this in the middle of those grasses and let them come up and do their thing in between the grasses. So by the time the world milkweed is done blooming, your grasses come up beyond it and do their thing in the fall. Because with this bloom that you're seeing, oh, it's probably let's call it a summer bloomer. Not late summer, but let's call it midsummer bloomer, good heat of the summer bloomer, like July. And man, pollinating insects go crazy for this plant. And I wish it was more in gardens or more available to us in gardens, but it's another one that doesn't perform well in containers. So oftentimes you'll see it not be available. But I would encourage you to order some seed and do it that way because it's easy to obtain the seed. Okay, that's my shtick with milkweeds, and I don't see any questions in the chat, so we're going to move on to another great group of plants that every garden should have, but I mean every, because one, they're easy plants to grow. Two, we're looking for plants that invite a myriad of different species. It fits that bill. It's attractive and easy to
Hey,
grow.
Bob.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see the Q&A, but there is a question in the
Oh,
Q&A.
I do see that. I think, let me look at this more. There we go. Oh, my anise hyssop tends to flop and also gets knocked over and broken off by the wind. Yeah, Gail. Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you have that giant? If the giant one gets, gosh, up to 5 feet, if you have the straight up anise hyssop, I'm assuming it gets maybe to 3 feet. Maybe try pinching it back and don't letting it bloom. Let it, come up. It might be a little leggy in the spring, shooting for the sky. And then if you cut it back by 50%, you're going to keep that plant more stout and it'll still flower for you after you let it recover. But then you're going to take what you're harvesting and making a tea out of it or drying it and making a tea out of it later. If you get into that habit, you'll allow it to bloom at a shorter height and it will not get as floppy, or it'll be stronger, not get blown over by the wind. And maybe sometimes if plants are flopping on us, it could be the location too. So Gail, if you have it in too much shade, half day of shade, where it's getting a little lush in that part shade situation, that could have something to do with that floppiness as well. Okie dokie. All right, so on to the mountain mints. Hopefully some of you folks are growing mountain mints. If you are, put it in the chat. Tell me if you love them or hate them, because I'd be surprised if you hate them. But anyway, for those of you that don't know them, the mountain mints are not a true mint. The true mints like spearmint and peppermint, those are mentha species. And as you see here, these are pycnanthemum. And there's probably around 5 species that we usually sell at the Arboretum because I love all 5 and they all 5 kind of have just something new to add to the table. And one of my favorites though is this Virginia mountain mint, more of an eastern United States species. I don't think it quite makes it into Nebraska, certainly into Iowa and Missouri, close enough native, I call it. And another one that is just invites all sorts of pollinating insects for it. Really a good one to include in the garden. The difference between this and spearmint and all the other mints, they named it mountain mint because it is more native to the Appalachian Mountains, hence the name mountain mint. But it's not the mint that came from across the pond like spearmint and peppermint. It does not spread aggressively at all. Your clump might get a little bit bigger every year, but it's a welcome bigger and really, really easy to grow. Just a fantastic plant. And it also makes a great tea. And before it flowers, I'll cut parts of the plant back there. You can see the foliage, very easy to grab a big handful and cut it back and then put it into a pitcher and then make a cold brew tea out of it. Usually I'll just grab a big cluster, maybe, oh, I don't know, a couple cups and stick it in a big pitcher and put that pitcher in the refrigerator and forget about it for 3 days. Awesome plant for that. And then this is the one that's more native to Nebraska. This is called narrowleaf mountain mint, another pycnanthemum species. And there's a close-up of the flowers. They're cute. And I think the seed heads are really pretty too. So even after it flowers, those funky silvery seed heads really stand out amongst that foliage. So you can see the foliage of the narrowleaf mountain mint is much finer, very wiry. And plants that have fine, wiry leaves like that are a good indicator of drought tolerance. So Virginia mountain mint, I would plant in my rain garden or average garden soil. This one I would plant in my hot spot. It's dry, it's sunny. I never want to have to water it. I need a tough plant for that spot. Then I would choose narrowleaf mountain mint. Not as nearly as fragrant as the other mountain mints, so this one would not qualify for my tea. So this one I would just keep for the flowers and that cool seed head. Easy plant, maybe about a 2 by 2 foot meatball, the narrowleaf mountain mint. And again, pollinator magnet. Awesome plant. And then there's the toothed mountain mint. So what's interesting, this one has a very lovely scent to it too, very minty scent. And the plant just has green leaves on it when it's coming up, like right now in the garden. Mine at home is probably about shin high or so. Later on in late summer, it produces the top of the plant produces these silvery bracts or these silvery leaves. And then these leaves are surrounding a flower cluster. So you can see there's tiny little flowers on here, but all of these little bumps here are flower buds. So this is all yet to bloom yet. So it's going to completely encircle this whole thing before it's done blooming. And I tell you what, it is a fantastic plant for pollinating insects, top notch. And you see the little line here, it's rich in pulegone, a natural insect repellent. So if you're out in the garden working and the ticks or gnats are driving you nuts, I don't know about mosquitoes, I haven't tried that yet, but you can rub that all over your skin to keep them away from you. But what really likes them are the mud daubers. That's these fast flying wasps that you see here. And you might say, what are mud daubers good for? They feed their larvae soft-bodied insects. So they're another one that keeps other leaf-eating insects under control. And another good thing about pycnanthemums that qualifies it for a top-notch pollinator plant is, does it invite a myriad of different species, or it is just one species hitting this flower? How many different species are hitting it? So many different ones will hit the blunt mountain mint. In fact, you guys, this plant is so awesome, it won the 2025 Perennial Plant Association Plant of the Year. And I was rather shocked that this was the plant that they chose to win Perennial Plant Association, because this is a national group, meaning you better be a good perennial if you're going to win that award. And I guarantee you the reason it won the award is not from these tiny little flowers that aren't very showy, in my opinion. What's showy is that look, that silvery look. It looks like a shrub in late summer. Just can't say enough about it. This one, however, does spread a little bit more than the others. It will run a little bit, but if it runs too far, I'll just take a spade and chop some away or dig some away and give it to a friend, or you can, just discard the plant and compost it, but easy to control if it's growing a little bit too out of bounds for you. So that's my take on the mountain mints. I didn't show you hairy mountain mint. That's another species that I like for part shade. I'm also have grown one. Let's see, what is the name of that other mountain mint? It's an eastern species, but the name's escaping me now. Appalachian mountain mint. But that one I'm finding is not a very good performer here in our neck of the woods, so I'm probably going to cross that off my to-do list. There's plenty of other species to choose from. Okay, now the penstemons. Penstemons are a wonderful group of plants. There's lots of different penstemons we can grow in the garden. This is like penstemon time right now. They're starting to bloom in the garden, a few of them, and when the penstemons shine is usually late May, and they're very spiky, upright plant, so very vertical plant that fit into tight areas very well. And it's another one of them that a wide variety of bees will hit, so fantastic pollinator plant for that reason. And there's a number of them native to Nebraska. Probably the best that you best chance of seeing one growing out in Nebraska is this one, the shell-leaf penstemon. In fact, the Department of Roads has been using this plant in roadside plantings, and it's being rather successful in those roadside plantings. In the garden, this is a dryland species, so man, it needs it high and dry to really do well, like a rock garden setting, or even an area where I'm not going to mulch it. I'm just going to leave it on open ground and let it seed around, because this plant can be short-lived, 2 to 3 years. But where I had it growing best was when I had gravel mulch around this plant. It loves to reseed in gravel mulch. But what a winner of a plant. The flowers kind of line themselves up in whorls. You can see individual whorls going up this stem, and then the leaves are just starting to develop. But as these leaves develop and get bigger, they look like a clamshell, hence the name shell-leaf penstemon. And the leaves are very thick and leathery and blue-green in color. And if you rub them, that blue-green color kind of comes off. So that's a waxy coating, we call it. And that thick, fleshy leaf also helps to hold in moisture. So another good indicator of drought tolerance on a plant are thick, leathery leaves, leaves that are fleshy because they hold more moisture, leaves that are blue-green because that helps reflect light. Um, Lots of different drought um, attributes that plants have. And I love talking about those because then you can see the plant literally in a container and know what conditions it's going to want to grow in, even before you look at the tag or you look it up. Where does it want to grow online? What conditions does it like? Because there's so much great information out there, folks, to learn those things, right? Love these two penstemons too. Some of my favorites in the garden. I have both of these at home as well. Hairy penstemon and smooth penstemon. The difference is, well, one's hairy and one's smooth. So what they mean by hairy is it's hard to tell in this picture, but the stem is covered with these fine hairs, and the leaves are also covered with these fine hairs, whereas smooth penstemon doesn't have any hairs on it at all. And beard tongue, uh, foxglove penstemon is another name for the smooth penstemon, probably more appropriate because it kind of looks like a foxglove, if you will, but much tougher and easier to grow than a foxglove. And what I love about hairy penstemon, this is one of my all-time favorite perennials, period. It'll tolerate a half day of shade to full sun, easy to grow, long-lived for a penstemon. The shell leaf is rather short-lived, but man, this hairy penstemon will live, gosh, for more than a decade. Looks like we got another Q&A. My Husker Red didn't come back this year. It was beautiful for the last 4 years. Does this have a limited lifespan? Yeah, I'm afraid it does. And it's a smooth penstemon. Your Husker Red was a selection of the smooth penstemon, the one you see in the picture here. And it actually was found in Nebraska in some lady's backyard. She contacted Dale Lindgren, who was a penstemon breeder at North Platte, and said, "Hey, I have this penstemon in my backyard that has this pretty purplish red foliage on it." So he went back there and checked it out and distributed the plant out and named it Husker Red, even though the flowers don't look anything like crimson, like the true Husker Red, I guess. But still, yes, to answer your question, 4 years is about tops, I'm afraid. And it is disappointing when it goes. That's why I say let it produce babies because you'll want them to replace the mother plant. And maybe you didn't get any babies out of it. It just depends. And what I say to folks is those seed heads that produce on these plants, you'll see those seed heads when they turn brown in the fall. If you pop one of those off and crush it open, you'll see the little seeds inside. What I'll often do is those seed heads are opening is I'll cut it and then I'll walk around the garden and then just kind of tap it against my hand or against my side to release those seeds here and there, especially on open ground. And that's a good way to perpetuate the species. But the longest lived one that I've grown so far has been this hairy, and it's rare to get 10 years out of a penstemon, but hairy will do it. Awesome plant. Rocky Mountain, according to the Dale Lindgren I was telling you about, he said for him in North Platte, this was the longest lived species for him. The Rocky Mountain penstemon obviously comes from more the Rocky Mountain states. And the drier the conditions, the better for this plant. It does not want any irrigation. It just wants you to leave it alone. This is actually at the Game and Parks headquarters here in Lincoln. And I think the Rocky Mountain penstemon, at least in this cat's opinion, has the prettiest gentian blue. You can see it's kind of two-toned, this purplish blue to the flower spikes. What a gorgeous scene. And the leaves are like shiny and glossy. And that shellacking, I don't think I have a close-up of the leaves, unfortunately, if I didn't do it, darn it. Anyway, they're shiny. And that shiny leaf is another indicator of drought tolerance because a shiny leaf is covered with that waxy coating and it's keeping the moisture inside the leaf so the plant doesn't lose moisture so readily. But there's a close-up of that really unusual flower of the Rocky Mountain penstemon. Just a gorgeous plant. In fact, this I took out in Sidney, Nebraska. If you know where Sidney is out there by Ogallala, this was at a display beds that they didn't know this plant until we planted it out there. So I had to get a picture once I saw how well it was performing. This is the type of plant that belongs out in North Platte. It belongs in places like Sydney and Scottsbluff and Ainsworth and gosh, Valentine and all of the above. Certainly Lincoln, Nebraska, as you saw, it's doing just fine in this picture in Lincoln, Nebraska too. Couple of other penstemons that I've been growing recently that I think should be added to any garden as a pollinator plant, the calico penstemon and the slender. These are both species native to Nebraska as well, not as common, and we need to change that. We've been selling them at the Arboretum for a number of years now, and the flowers on the calico can really be different. Some are darker pink than others. Some are more of a pale, almost white, as you can see just even on within an individual plant. And slender penstemon gets its name from the foliage, which is very finely cut. Remember what I said about foliage? If it's reducing its surface area and becoming very needle-like, that's an indicator of drought tolerance, right? And this calico, what I like about this one is it's probably the most shade tolerant of all the penstemons. Most of your penstemons want wall-to-wall sunshine, whereas calico penstemon and the hairy, I would say too, and the smooth, all three take easily a half a day of shade. And oftentimes, penstemons look really cool when they're emerging in the spring. There's kind of a close-up of that waxy, thick, leathery foliage that you see there, a good indicator of drought tolerance. Okay, how are we doing with time here? Got a half hour yet. Okay, we're buzzing through them. Okay, you guys, remember that picture I showed you of Helen's flower that showed you that composite flower, that pattern that you see in flower clusters? That's called the Fibonacci scale, and it's a way that the plant kind of arranged its flowers and arranged the seed production to be the most efficient way to arrange them. Let's see. I think, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I thought we had a new chat. Okay, so anyway, showing off this picture to show once again what qualifies a flower as being top notch. Those that invite a plethora of different species. The more diverse, the better. And if one thing too, I want you to get out of this talk tonight is, if you're out there in the garden strolling around, enjoying, do I have any pollinating insects? Watch them work the flowers because you often see them work in a circle. And the reason they're working in a circle is they're checking these. And to the flower, you can see the skirt below here. This is all the spent flowers. They're all gone. The only part that's in bloom is this line right along here. Each one of these yellow dots is an individual flower, and the bee knows it. So the bee will quickly work it and maybe hit 2 or 3 flowers and fly on. A buddy might land right behind him and work 3 more. So this guarantees repeat visitors. And then all of these in here are still buds that have yet to bloom. So you can see these are almost done blooming up here, the very tips. And so those are almost seeing better days as far as a black-eyed Susan goes for its show in the garden. Showy black-eyed Susan is kind of your classic. And I've had people say they get too aggressive, they seed around too much. Sure, they're going to seed around on open ground, but I would rather have something like this become a problem for me than dandelions or crabgrass or foxtail, right? So let them swallow up that open space or get more plants in it. If you have a garden that's already full of plants, you're not going to have showy black-eyed Susan taking over your world. You're just not. And they're easy to remove if they are. But showy black-eyed Susan, what it's got is more of a daisy look. As you can see, a lot of times the black-eyed Susans, there's one called a Goldstrom out there, for example. It just looks like this solid meatball, and the flowers are resting right on top of the foliage. Whereas these are more individual stems, as you can see, gives it more of a true daisy type appearance. But I really like that open, loose look of the plant. I think it's gorgeous. And then it's got a cousin that's a taller version. So this guy is about, let's say 2 to 3 feet tall. Whereas this one, the sweet cone flower, is a black-eyed Susan on steroids. This guy gets 5 feet tall. but love, love, love this plant. It's long-lived, easy to grow, tough as nails. It can get floppy in the garden if it gets top watered or if it gets too much irrigation. It wants it high and dry. And I've seen it in some tough spaces where that tough space killed other plants and it didn't kill this one. And you can see it here blooming with goldenrod. So it's a late summer bloomer. Yeah, let's call it late summer, early September, late October. I'm sorry, late August. Easy plant to grow, and it's called sweet goldenrod. You can be walking by this plant even when it's not in bloom, and the foliage smells sweet. And I think it should be grown just for that. In the fall, when the plant's going downhill, like say we've had some hard freezes and the plant has turned brown and just kind of there setting up for winter, you can walk by this plant and smell it in the air. Where's that sweet fragrance coming from? It's actually the foliage of this plant. And I've actually cut that spent foliage and um, put it in like a garage or something to kind of make the garage smell sweeter. But what an impressive black-eyed Susan the sweet coneflower is. And then the biggest of all the black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckias, so they have these names that can be confusing. Isn't coneflower echinacea? Yes, but some of these others, Rudbeckia species, are also called um, coneflowers, you see. And so this one, Herbstone, is a German name, and it means autumn sun. So this guy blooms in early autumn, and you can see with that fellow standing next to it, it gets a solid 7 feet tall. Great backdrop plant in the garden. Picture this with Joe Pye weed. It looks fantastic with Joe Pye, and the individual flowers are very gorgeous. Here again, you can see the cone, you can see the skirt, and you can see each one of those little yellow dots is a flower. So this one hasn't even started. The yellow skirt's way down here. So a good, good, long, long bloom time in the fall. Fantastic plant. It just gets a little big for people, and big plants scare people for some reason. I think they're easy and impressive, and they make a great screen. Oftentimes, people are looking for a fast screen, maybe for their neighbor or whatever you're trying to screen, and they'll often plant evergreens. Well, heck, you can plant these big, bold perennials and get your screen. Now, granted, you have to cut them back in the spring, but by July, August, you screen that unsightly thing in the backdrop. There's a couple of species of prairie clovers. There's more than these two native to Nebraska. I think we have like 5 or 6, maybe even 7 that are native to Nebraska, but these two are great for the garden. The purple prairie clover, what a delicious, delicious plant. Here again, you can see that same pattern. You see this Fibonacci scale, how they're all lined up to kind of form this spiral, if you will. Isn't that cool how nature figured that out? And then what happens is each one of these dots you see here will become an individual flower. And this skirt you see right here that has the golden anthers, one of those little tiny things is a flower. So down below here, it starts blooming down here and works its way up. You can see it's about halfway done. So it'll have to go all the way up. Some of the skirts, like this one, just about done. Others just getting started. So again, a good long bloom time on the purple prairie clover. Loves it high and dry, wants it hot and sunny. Anything less than that, it's not going to perform for you. And this is another one that the roadsides, the Department of Roads has been using as growing from seed and doing quite well in our road ditches, which is great. And there you see a close up from Chris Helzer. That's somebody I encourage you to watch. Chris Helzer gave permission to use his photographs there for the Nature Conservancy. If you just type in his name, you can follow him on Facebook because Chris is always taking great images because he's very into the what insects are interacting with these native plants. The purple prairie clover, what a lovely plant. And I think the foliage is really cool, very fine and furry or ferny-like. And remember what I said about reduced surface area, plants that have needle-like leaves. There you see the close-up of the leaves. Not a whole lot of leaves on that plant, and what leaves are there are very reduced. Good indicator of what? That's right, drought tolerance. Extremely drought tolerant plant. And there it is growing in nature. And look at that wonderful soil it's growing in. I mean, tough, nasty, gravelly, rocky soil. And the plant is just shrugging its shoulders and saying, bring it on. What a lovely bird. And there it is in more of a roadside planting. So you can see the prairie grasses in there with it. The grasses, again, as I said before, very important texturally because that fine texture is just highlighting those flowers. And it almost looks like the flowers are coming out of the grass. Well, they are, but you know what I mean? It looks like the grass is in bloom, darn near. What a cool scene, huh? And then later on, the seed heads are really pretty, I think. They're, kind of a nice, buff brown color, and they'll persist like that, looking good for weeks on end. You can actually go and harvest that seed and sow it around. This is another one where rather than wood chip mulch or grass clippings or straw, I'm going to mulch this with road gravel. It likes it that dry, and I found that it'll reseed really well in that road gravel. So consider creating a garden where your space is including, these are called what we call xeric species, Xeric. So a xeric species is a dry land species like this one. And they don't really like or need wood chip mulch or any other mulch. You get them established and they're on their own and they will reseed better. Penstemons will reseed in that gravel mulch. So you could really create this little mini rock garden at home. And maybe it's only a 5 by 5 foot area, but try it because if you never try it, you'll never know. And I know people that do that. Maybe you'll put a few rocks in there, maybe bury those rocks halfway so it looks like a cute little rock garden. But then amend that soil with gravel and sand and good topsoil and you'll have this nice, well-drained condition for these plants. And then when it comes to mulching, you get yourself some cheap road gravel and mulch away. Of course, you can do granite chips or whatever if you want to make it look better. But I'm telling you, it is a fun way to garden. Okay, white prairie clover is purple prairie clover's cousin. And this one's not as common in gardens as the purple. You can see the purple prairie clover in the backdrop here. I think it's a lovely plant. And there again, you can see the same pattern, the same skirt type thing where these buds are starting to turn white here on this one, just getting started down here. What a cool plant. And it's another one that fits that top-notch status because it attracts a diversity of species to it. But again, it looks rather, this is in an actual prairie and it can look rather open to people, I guess. I like that look. And you can see all the spaces in between those grass clumps. That's the type of look you can mimic in your own stylized prairie where you're planting the grass clumps. Say this is a little blue stem, and then you're planting wildflowers like this in between those grass clumps. Easy to do, and there's no wrong way to do it, folks. There really isn't. Just a matter of getting it done. Okay, rattlesnake master. Fantastic plant. This is a picture of my garden. I like it for its foliage effect. It almost looks like a yucca, hence the name yuccafolium or yucca-like foliage. But rattlesnake master is not related to the yuccas, and it gets its name because it used to be an antidote for snake venom, but that's another name for another story. It's an eryngium species. Eryngiums, oh, poo, what's the another common name? It's not coming to my brain right now. Anyway, love that blue-green foliage on it. Again, waxy coating, very drought tolerant, thick leathery leaf. Another indicator of drought tolerance, right? But when it blooms, you have these, another name for it is honey balls because these smell like honey. But the flowers, the individual flowers, is that tiny little guy right there. So one flower head could have 100 individual flowers on it. So it invites a myriad of insects, and it really makes for a great garden combination. Here it is with, you remember when we talked about the blue giant hyssop? So there's blue giant hyssop, and this is one of the cone flowers. This is pale purple coneflower. And then this is rattlesnake master. What a lovely combination, huh? It really lends itself that white flower and the texture of that plant to different plant combinations. There's a close-up of the flower clusters. Really cool plant, unusual. And again, each one of these represents a flower, each one of those dots. There it is. You remember the sweet cone flower I showed you before? Here it is with Rattlesnake Master in the garden. A better close-up of the flowers. Isn't that cool? You remember the pattern we're talking about? That spiral Fibonacci pattern repeated again and again and again in nature. All the composites decided this is the way to go. But that's another thing I want you to remember. If there's anything you notice, is notice those flowers that have this pattern because they tend to be long bloomers. Can't get enough of Rattlesnake Master. Awesome plant. And tough as nails, folks. Now, just a quick shout out to the sunflowers. The sunflowers don't necessarily play nice in the garden, but everybody wants to know what top-notch pollinators are, and sunflowers fit the bill. They're fantastic plants for pollinators. Maximilian's probably the best in my opinion, the most floriferous. What you're looking at is one stem might have 100 flowers on it. The only problem is Maximilian gets huge. I mean, we're talking 8 feet tall, if not taller, and it's very aggressive. So it runs. So this plant would be planted in between a rock and a hard place, kind of, let it fill a space. Maybe you surround it with mowed a mowed surface or whatever to keep it from spreading. And you don't want it to go to seed as well. So just know it comes with, it comes with issues for us humans, but to pollinating insects, wow. And for a cut flower, picture making a bouquet with 3-foot stems and maybe sticking about a dozen of those in a vase. Be the best vase you ever brought your wife, like ever. And there you see just the insects just crowding that thing. This is a false sunflower, a Heliopsis, not a true sunflower, but probably the one you're going to see more available in the garden centers. The Heliopsis are fantastic. There's a number of named cultivars out there, and they're all just as good too. They seed around nicely in the garden. They don't take over. And then I love the silphiums. The silphiums are also called, like compass plant is one of the common silphiums. Not a true sunflower. They bloom a month before the regular sunflowers, and the difference is the individual flowers have these black anthers. Sunflowers don't have those black anthers. So you can see kind of a close up there. They all kind of look very similar, don't they? And whereas the Heliopsis, you see, doesn't have the black anthers, they have yellow anthers. All right. So here's one of the silphiums, rosinweed, vastly overlooked plant in the garden, easy to grow. It's a big boy though. It'll get 5, 6 feet tall, but drought tolerant, extreme drought tolerance, very easy, very dependable in the garden. Great backdrop plant, the rosinweed. And then here's compass plant, another cool silphium. The sizzling silphiums, the reason I give them that name is because they bloom in the heat of summer, the dog days of August. And who wouldn't love a plant like that, right? And the foliage of compass plant is very unique. This individual leaf could be 2 feet tall and very rough and coarse and almost like sandpaper. And it's covering itself with these little fine, rigid hairs that give it that sandpapery texture. Very thick, leathery leaf, a great indicator of this plant's amazing drought tolerance. And then finally, the final silphium is this cup plant, which is more native to wet areas. So compass plant will grow in dry soils and dry prairies. This one grows on wet prairies. And cup plant is very aptly named. These huge leaves will actually clasp the stem. And you can see this little critter in here. What it's doing is getting a drink of water because after a rain, the water will collect in the leaves right there. And critters will take advantage of it. Not only small mammals and birds, but insects as well can take advantage of each one of these whorls that you see going up the stem holds water. So all the way down after a rain. How cool is that? The leaves completely clasp the stems. And there's a close-up of the flower. Just a pollinator magnet, but it's another one that gets big. And now just the opposite. The spiderworts, they stay really small, especially this dwarf guy. This dwarf spiderwort in my opinion, should be in every garden. It's so easy to grow, so dependable. And yes, it'll seed around, but nicely. And it's such a short guy, maybe only 6 inches tall. Oftentimes, the flowers are 2 inches across and only 3 to 4 inches off the ground. It's just the plant will kind of keep expanding up as it's blooming to about 12 inches. And it's covered in these fine hairs too, indicating drought tolerance. But not common at all in the garden trade, you guys. Most of the times, if you see a spiderwort, they come from the eastern United States. This is a Great Plains endemic species, only really occurs in 3 states in the world. So worth growing, worth finding, and putting in the garden. Early spring bloomer, we're talking first part of May into mid-May, and invites a wide diversity of species to it. And then it's got a cousin called the prairie spiderwort, or also Ohio spiderwort. You see the Ohioensis in its name. So this is native to not only the Great Plains, but gets in the eastern U.S. as well. Another very easy plant to grow. This one, though, might seed around for a little more than people like. It gets a little taller and leggier than the dwarf spiderwort, but still a nice garden native that invites a diversity of species. Okay, love the vervain. Hoary vervain is hands down one of the best weeds. And I call it a weed, folks, because to a rancher, this is a weed because cows won't eat it. So it tends to be an increaser out in overgrazed pastures. So farmers have long regarded this as weeds, I should say ranchers. But us gardeners, man, can really enjoy this in the garden. It has a long bloom time, not necessarily one you will find for sale, but you can certainly order the seed, or when you see where it's blooming, collect your own seed. Blooms for a really, really long period of time, extremely drought tolerant, easy plant to grow. And its cousin is called blue vervain. You'll see blue vervain more in moist areas. So we got a dryland species with the hoary, and then more of a wetland species with the blue vervain, but both top-notch pollinator plants. So you get the idea. We have so many plants to choose from. Hopefully, I'm not giving you a plant headache. Remember the wild quinine I showed you earlier that was combined with the butterfly milkweed and I believe it was mountain mint? This is a spotlight on wild quinine, which is probably one of the more unusual wildflowers you can grow. More native to the eastern United States, doesn't quite get into Nebraska, but close enough. But that's as showy as the flowers get. That's a fully open flower right there where my cursor is. But if we look at it up close, well, first we'll look at it in combination with other plants. Here it is with some coneflower and one of the summer blooming alliums. Likely this is prairie onion right there. Gorgeous combination. And then we got some little blue stem in there as well. And then here's wild quinine with balloon flower, with the thick spike gay feather and some bee balm over here. Great combination there. And it's another one that fits that top-notch bill because it invites a myriad of different pollinating species. But the close-up of the flowers, you can see this little thing right here is a flower. These are all buds yet. So it has a long bloom time because of that, but it almost just kind of looks like cotton sitting on top of this very robust dark green leaf. But it's an awesome plant. Wild senna, uh, one of the few flowers I know of that really has these showy dark black anthers to them. Very unusual flower. I really don't know of another flower that looks like the sennas. You can see up close what I'm talking about, but it's what gets pollinated by we call buzz pollination or sonication. Whereas when bees are buzzing around, they'll buzz, buzz their body, and that buzz vibration releases the pollen. Because these flowers hang upside down, and the pollen would all just kind of fall out of the flower if it didn't require that buzz pollination. But bumblebee favorite, this guy blooms late summer, and gets to be about, it's a big boy. It's solid 4 feet tall, but what an easy plant to grow, tough as nails. And it's a host for the beautiful cloudless sulfur butterfly. One we would all love to see this butterfly in our garden. It's a beautiful greenish yellow color and big for a you might know the sulfur butterflies. Those are those yellow ones that you see that bother your cabbage plants. The cloudless sulfur, that's a different animal. And here's what the larvae look like to it. So yeah, and they actually did research on this, and bumblebees preferred flowers that produce pollen that has a higher protein to lipid ratio. And they found that wild senna was the favorite of bumblebees amongst the plants used in the study. So top-notch late summer bloomer for bumblebees. And I think it's got cool tropical looking foliage as well. Okay, that's it. I just wanted to give a shout out now to another group of pollinating insects. I don't see anything in the chat unless somebody has some last minute questions. We're about out of time here. But I just wanted to show you a quick spotlight on flies because a lot of times flies get kind of pushed aside when it comes to their importance, ecological services. Flies are very important for the ecological services. In fact, a lot of times we're looking at flies and we don't even know it because they will mimic a bee. And how do you know it's a fly and not a bee? Flies are in the group Diptera and or die or two wings. So flies will always only have two wings, whereas bees have four wings. And so here's some individual flies that you can see. There's the syrphid fly, the hover fly, the tachinid fly, and robber fly. All four are very important critters, mainly in their larval stage, because their larval stage is what's feeding on soft-bodied insects, what we consider pests in the garden. I'll just show you an example. So they'll lay their eggs on the back of a caterpillar, and then the critter will bore inside the caterpillar and literally suck it dry. I know that's kind of gross, but it is what it is. They're sucking out that juices at the caterpillar. And then here is, again, we heard of lady beetles, but the syrphid flies will also eat thrips, just like a dinosaur movie. And then the bottle fly, you've probably seen these around. These are those colorful iridescent flies. But what do they eat, right? What are their larvae eating? Sure, they may lay their eggs on freshly killed animals, but they're still important pollinators. There you can see their furry coating where the pollen's sticking to it. So there's the blue and the green bottle fly. There's a close-up picture of the syrphid flies. And they may be after they might scare you a little bit, but they're flies. They don't have stingers. What they're after is the salt there and the sweat. Pretty cool. And then there's the fun hover flies that can kind of hover like a helicopter. Get this, they're known to visit at least 70% of global food crops and over 70% of animal pollinated wildflowers. So that's how important the hoverfly is. 72% of global food crops. Without that critter, would we starve to death? We don't know. But there is what their larvae look like. Kind of, again, a scene out of a monster movie. There they're taking out aphids. A single larvae can eat 20 to 30 aphids a day and up to 400 during its development. So this lowly critter, I would argue, is very important, wouldn't you? There's the tachinid fly. And where does it lay its eggs? Yeah, it deserves a big high five for the work it does in your garden. So there's the syrphid fly. Oh, so by the way, I think we're pretty much, yeah, we're out of time here, guys. We'll end it here, but I could put in the good word to you, Kian, that I have this PowerPoint. It's a canned PowerPoint that I have not shown to anybody yet. And it's just, maybe it's because I'm not advertising it much, but I made it a couple years ago and it's called Beneficial Backyard Bugs. So in other words, I'm highlighting all those bugs that we may consider daddy longlegs. What are they good for? So I was curious. That's why I made it, because it enabled me to fall down that rabbit hole and say, yeah, what are daddy longlegs good for, right? What are wolf spiders good for? What are all these critters good for? And so if you're interested, we could do that maybe next year, something like that. And maybe folks would be interested in hearing about that. Because again, I think, pollinating insects certainly get all the attention, but I like to look at my garden as an insectary. I'm raising insects because they kind of keep the planet spinning, if you will. All we need is more bugs, some people might say. No, I'm talking about beneficial insects. Because get this, guys, of all the insects out there, only 3% have been deemed damaging to crops. 3%. So I would say the other 97% are pretty important. Okay, what does Tammy say here? Would making seed balls like Monarch Society does for milkweed be a successful method of getting a lot of these natives discussed today planted, or are seed balls only best for milkweed? I'm trying to get a fairly steep, sunny slope turned into pollinator garden. The seed balls, I think, are just a fun way of doing it, Tammy. You certainly don't have to make them into that ball. I think the idea is that the seed is connected to the soil there, and then with freeze thaw breaking that up, that helps. Certainly you can do something like that. And especially if you have youngsters, you can get involved, because I think it's a cool thing to do with them, but certainly not necessary. You can, just go and scatter that seed on a steep slope. Just know that if you can kind of rough up the ground, just like any prepared seed bed, if you can kind of get some sort of tines out there or anything to kind of really rough up that ground first. You want the soil and seed contact, you see. And if you're just sowing seed that's kind of held up on top of the existing duff or plant material, it's going to have a hard time germinating. Hope that makes sense. So, because slopes are hard to deal with in general. You can also do a little bit of plugging in that slope, and you would go with those wildflowers that are very beefy. I call them easy to grow. Some of those xeric species I was showing you today. Yeah, there would be some good things. One of my first plants though, Tammy, I'd put on that slope would be purple poppy mallow. And you could do it from seed, you could do it from plugs. And another one to remember is Missouri primrose, because the two bloom around the same time. They love slopes, tough as nails. Can't kill them with a stick. Okay, I don't know if we have another one in there.
Yeah, I don't think I'm seeing any more questions right now, but this was really great. And I also think that that beneficial insects one sounds really interesting. So definitely we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah, I mean it's a big one. It's a big PowerPoint, and for all I know, it's going to take two parts because it's kind of hard to run out of bugs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a few of them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much again for doing this part two and all the other many workshops that you've done with us this year. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what else you do and doing more stuff.
Yeah, if I remember right, we don't have anything else scheduled, do we, this time for this
I
year
this
yet? I think
this
this was it for this year.
yeah, I think this might be the last one, but I'm sure
Yeah,
you
they'll
got a busy summer ahead of you. It's,
got a busy summer, and yeah, will hit me up again in the fall, and we'll figure out some programs for next year, and hope you guys stay tuned. We'll come up with hopefully some new ideas, and yeah, do new pretty pictures to show you.
yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Have a good
You're
rest of your
welcome.
night.
All right, thanks, guys. Bye-bye.